Well, I went. Well, you might have been hiding in the back or something. Good morning. We're kind of scattered this morning, but look like we're enjoying the company of each other. A lot of people visiting. I encourage you to find somebody to sit with and share class with this morning. We're going to go ahead and start here in just a minute. I guess it's about time to begin, and that we may have some others continue to trickle in. That's fine. I think different classes start differently, but probably a lot of them start with a prayer. So I guess let's start. Jerry, would you mind leading us in a prayer?
Heavenly Father, we're so thankful that we have the ability to be here this morning to assemble as saints. Thank you, Father, for the blessing for us to be here. May our eyes and ears be open unto your word. Father, we're thankful that you love us, you forgive us, you watch after us. Continue to be with us this morning in our effort to worship you. In Jesus' name, amen.
Thank you. We have had, I don't know if you want to call it a cornucopia, or we've had a variety. We've had a lot of topics, really good themes for discussion in our Bible classes. I guess the last time I was here, we talked about the analogy of Jesus being kind of the gate to the sheep pen, and we just had an excellent lesson Wednesday night, our summer series, about an individual who had traveled to Israel and actually seen a person become like the literal gate, had the hole in the wall, and so that just tied in with our study. This morning, the message is on the call for self-denial, or the call to self-denial. Don't know that I'm a very qualified person to do this, because I think I, like many others, struggle to try to deny myself. And we live in a society that's blessed to a point where we can almost have anything that we want to have. Of course, when you're young and you're growing up, they say you can be anything you want to be. You can have anything you want to have. Follow your dream. Set your goals high, and just if you want it, go get it. I don't know if you're like me, but sometimes it becomes difficult at Christmas to try to figure out what to give somebody, because you say, well, they already have everything. What do I find them? We probably, if you're like my family, if you see something and you want it, you just go ahead and buy it. And sometimes if you're super competitive, you might say, well, if I don't buy it now, it might not be there later. And so we're kind of so accustomed to just getting what we want and make sure we have what we need, even if we don't really need it. And then you can follow some of this logic and keep going. How many of us have had or maybe had a need of storing something somewhere? We don't have enough room in our house. You got to store a rental unit, or your attic's full, your garage is full. We just had world's largest garage sale. Maybe you had to pull a table or two out and you had to unload. I thought about pulling up a board and trying to think about some of the things that we have to try to deny ourselves. Up until about 3 or 4 years ago, I guess I probably would not say that I've struggled with worrying about weight. I know growing up, and I'm not sure where my mind's headed this morning. This is not in my notes, obviously. This is just the way a teacher gets. This off the cuff. I guess you could say I'm a beanpole, okay? I'm a skinny guy, and growing up, always worried about, just self-conscious. And remember a lady at church, and I loved her, sweet woman, just say, "When are you going to gain some weight?" And I guess I could have said, "Well, when are you going to lose some?" But I didn't, But where I'm headed with this, I started taking some medicine a few years ago, and I guess maybe one of the side effects is I actually started gaining weight. And so I think probably even in college, of course, I didn't go out and do the binge drinking, didn't get into the partying stuff, didn't gain all of that weight. A lot of kids, get off in that rabble-rousing. They gain a lot of weight. And I would say up until about 3 years ago, didn't really probably hit the 200-pound mark. And so where am I headed with this? Obviously, there's a big industry in our society around weight loss. Can you deny yourself? Can you take a supplement? Or can you, so that involves making choices. We're going to deny what we have to eat every day, deny the portion size. What else do we deny? Have to deny yourself some sweets. Maybe you wanted to go back and get a donut this morning, but had to decide, I know where that's going to go. He got there too late. He said there wasn't any left. So self-denial, I guess it comes down to a point where you have to decide, how bad do I want this? Is the consequence of what I will have to face severe enough that I can deny having it now because I know what the outcome's going to be later? I think one of the things that I've heard about discipline is until the punishment is severe enough to deter the goal or the pleasure of what it is, the kid's getting out of it, there's not any deterrent. There's not going to be any self-denial. So you have to make sure, the consequence is going to be severe enough. These are just kind of some crazy thoughts I have here on self-denial. What else do we have to deny? Deny temptations. Some of these things that we allow ourselves to do, we talk about the donuts. I don't know if you were a coffee drinker, and I would bet if we polled probably, I don't know, just a guess, I bet 80, 90% of us in here like to have coffee on a pretty regular basis. Anybody ever stopped drinking coffee and had a headache? I caught myself the other day, and I just had a lingering headache, and it's probably because I did not drink the coffee. Well, why didn't I do it? I thought, well, I'm going to cut back on how much coffee I drink because I got to put all the milk and the sugar, and I got to make it really good, and all that just adds to it. So sometimes you start denying yourself, then there's kind of these drawbacks, and I guess you can think about people that fight addictions. Then they start having withdrawals, and so there's the problem. They're so accustomed to having what they think they want or need, then you got to fight against that. So there's kind of some thoughts about self-denial. Now, maybe let's put this in a little bit of perspective. How many of these things that I've kind of been mentioning or talking about so far are life-threatening or immediate serious consequence? They're kind of superficial things, maybe we might say. And the passage that's given, if you're thinking about denial, what would you guess would be maybe the ultimate Bible passage for somebody to deny themselves? I bet you can guess where our text is. Whoever would deny himself, how's it end? Whoever would deny himself to take up his cross, okay? So there's kind of an extreme. We're talking about little things that we want to deny ourselves. How many of us actually have to think about something so serious enough we're going to deny basically everything that we want in life, and to the point of dying to the cross? So with self-denial in mind, you might think about how we use the term. Have you ever said something like, "We all have our cross to bear, I guess this one's mine"? Okay, so think about that for a second. We usually refer to things like an illness or a disability. Well, that's just my cross to bear. A hard or challenging circumstance, a difficult or unpleasant relationship, something that we just have to deal with. That's my cross to bear. It's just a saying, but then, do we really think about the idea to deny ourselves and take up our cross? Jesus, of course, is the one who first gives this expression, and it was the context of leading his disciples to fully follow him all the way to death. But what did that mean? And what did Jesus expect his disciples to deny themselves and take up their cross? Which of the frequent uses of the expression is accurate? I don't know if any of these are entirely accurate, so we've got to realize what is it to take up a cross. I had this in my Bible, and I thought about this morning, when I was getting ready for the lesson, and if you're interested in it, you might look it up. This is a little commentary by Dr. Douglas Leatherman, and it's on the crucifixion of Jesus, and I think he takes the position of a medical doctor who actually goes through and discusses what happens physiologically with the process of the body as it endures the anguish and the pain, and then, of course, gives some more detail about what one endures going through a crucifixion on a cross. When you read the New Testament and it says, and they delivered him to be scourged, and then it moves on. That it doesn't even begin to explain to you what happens. Now, you have to do a little bit of study to see what that means. And so I've got maybe a short passage here to help us think about the process of crucifixion. There's much disagreement among the authorities as to the scourging. This was a Roman, not Jewish custom. Before crucifixion, the hands were tied high to a tree or post. A whip was made out of short wood handle and heavy leather straps bearing usually the sharp bones of sheep knuckles or lead balls on the end. The Jews forbade more than 40 lashes. 39 was the maximum allowed, but the Romans did not have this limit. The scourging was usually carried out by a Roman soldier. The whip was brought down upon the bare back, cutting the skin first. Then as the beating progressed, the muscles were made bare, bruising and bleeding with marked loss of blood. In a significant number of instances, this was enough to kill a man. Ribs were broken, nerves exposed again and again. Down came the whip until either death or unconsciousness occurred. Both venous and arterial bleeding occurred. Large, deep, dark bruises on the surface began to appear. Finally, the skin of the back is hanging in long shreds. The whole area is an unrecognizable mass of torn, bleeding tissue. Death is prevented by Roman law if possible. Now the half-fainting Jesus is untied and slumps to the pavement, wet in his own blood. The Roman soldiers see great jest in this provincial Jew claiming to be a king. They throw a robe across his bleeding shoulders and place a reed in his hand, and a crown of thorns is pressed upon his head. This crown is made up of flexible branches covered with long thorns. Okay, let me see if I can find the part about the cross. In deference to Jewish custom, the Romans after they've scourged him, they put his garment on him. The heavy patibulum is tied across his bleeding shoulders. This was something I thought we might talk about, to deny yourself and take up your cross. So the cross, if you didn't already know this, was maybe two parts, and so the custom was that they would tie this big beam over the shoulders with the outstretched arms, and that was the beginning part of it, where they'd have to walk up to the point where the post was erected. The procession of Christ, Roman soldiers, and the women begin the slow journey to the place of the stipes. Together with the exhaustion, scourging, blood loss, and deep agony, his attempt to walk erect fails, and he stumbles, awakening the painful back. The rough wood scrapes across the exposed flesh. He tries to rise, but human muscles have been pushed beyond their endurance. The centurion, anxious to get on with the execution, selects a North African, Simon of Cyrene, to carry the cross. Jesus follows, still bleeding, sweating, and in all probability in cold, clammy shock, to the place of Golgotha. Where is this place today? It is not known, only that it is beyond the ancient city walls. Clad only in a loincloth, Jesus finally makes his way. Jesus is then thrown to the ground on his bleeding back, and quickly the centurion places a large spike in the wrist on one arm, then the other. The arm, I'm going to have to skip ahead. The patibulum or crossbar is then attached to the top of the stipes. Quickly the feet are nailed. This just goes on, but I want you just to envision in your mind, we're talking about deny yourself, take up your cross, and if you didn't realize this, that maybe is a little bit off, because we probably have in our picture the image of the entire cross and maybe dragging and pulling the whole thing, but maybe the tradition would have been that they would have had this beam tied and they would have walked, and probably very heavy. Of course, Jesus had help, I guess, by Simon of Cyrene to help carry the cross, and then eventually that was attached to the large post. Maybe that's splitting things down a little bit too specific, but I thought just for you to think about, when he makes this statement to his followers, what does that mean in their mind? Are they actually following through what they've seen before? Maybe an individual that's really in a situation where there's severe humiliation, looking at a person, scoffing, laughing, probably throwing stuff at them. It would be just the ultimate low a person could face before their death. So, This text comes out of Matthew chapter 16, if you will. Let's go to this passage, Matthew chapter 16, and read this instance. Beginning in verse 13, when Jesus came to the region of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, "Who do men say that I, the Son of Man, am?" So they said, "Some say John the Baptist, some Elijah, and the others Jeremiah or one of the prophets." He said to them, "But who do you say that I am?" Simon Peter answered and said, "You're the Christ, the Son of the living God." Jesus answered and said to him, "Blessed are you, Simon Bar-Jonah, for flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father who is in heaven. And I also say to you that you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades shall not prevail against it. And I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven, and whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven." And he commanded his disciples that they should tell no one that he was Jesus the Christ. From that time, Jesus began to show to his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and suffer many things from the elders and chief priests and scribes, and be killed and be raised the third day. Then Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him, saying, "Far be it from you, Lord, this shall not happen to you." But he turned and said to Peter, "Get behind me, Satan. You're an offense to me, for you're not mindful of the things of God, but the things of men." Then Jesus said to his disciples, "If anyone desires to come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. For whoever desires to save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. For what profit is it to a man if he gains the whole world and loses his own soul? Or what will a man give in exchange for his soul? For the Son of Man came in the glory of his Father, or will come in the glory of his Father with his angels, and then he will reward each according to his works. Assuredly I say to you, there are some standing here who shall not taste death till they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom." I think this is probably a very familiar passage to us. This one, I think maybe is just one of many instances where you see Peter's personality. He just seems very spontaneous, just very quick to react, very enthusiastic. The response that he gets from Christ, I'm sure, is not what he expected. You know, he basically is called out as Satan. I'm sure that would be very embarrassing. You know, you imagine his other friends, the other apostles there around, you know, to really be called out and humiliated. But Peter was not aware of what was going to happen. What, just from studies and from what you know, what expectation would they probably have had as far as what Jesus would bring to them? New leadership, a new kingship. You know, he would be honored, he would be elevated. Not that he would be brought down low and humiliated and to the point of death. Totally challenging the ideas of what Peter had expected about Christ. Leading up to this, Matthew records two exchanges in chapter 16. First, some Pharisees and Sadducees came to Jesus and demanded a sign from heaven that Jesus had authority to teach and work as he did. Jesus refused to play their games because their challenge was an argument of presuppositions and not a sincere search for truth. Next, Jesus warned his disciples about the faithless influence the Pharisees and Sadducees could have on their walk of faith. Soon after, Jesus took a moment to check his disciples' comprehension of who he was and what his mission was about. Who do people say the Son of Man is? Rumors were that Jesus was the resurrected presence of John the Baptist, Elijah, Jeremiah, or some other prophet. When asked directly, Peter speaks first and makes the declaration all who will follow Jesus must make. You're the Messiah, the Son of the living God. It's very likely that Peter and none of the other disciples comprehended what the words meant, but it was an important start nonetheless. Jesus affirms Peter for his faith-filled response and emphasized the significance of the confession on the future of God's purposes for mankind. On this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will overcome it. This is kind of pointing out what his purpose is, and he's going to talk about his great mission. From that time on, Jesus began to explain. This is coming out of verse 21. Jesus begins to explain. Peter and the other disciples had begun to believe Jesus' claims for himself, but now Jesus began to explain what his mission as Messiah meant. And so he goes on to explain that he must go to Jerusalem and suffer and be killed and be raised to life. Jesus' mission as Messiah was so unlike any conception and expectation the Jews had imagined for him, that Jesus would experience opposition from Jewish leadership, the very leaders who taught and anticipated the coming of the Messiah, and that the opposition from Jewish leadership would turn violent to the point of taking his life. All of this must have been beyond what the disciples could understand or even begin to fathom. In fact, Peter's reaction proves it. He was totally caught off guard, just could not believe, no, we won't hear of this. This isn't going to happen to you. Are you surprised at Jesus' response? Stan says no, he's not surprised. Well, if you're in Jesus' position, you might think he's saying it out of a caring attitude. He loves him, he doesn't want anything to happen to him. But what's the real problem here? Okay, Peter's looking at the earthly, worldly position. He's not understanding the full extent of Christ's mission, that this is part of the process. Peter took him aside, began to rebuke him. Peter had just made a great confession of faith. He had come to believe that the Messiah was standing in front of them. So this talk of suffering and death was more than he could take. Jesus' response to Peter was pointed and direct. Get behind me, Satan. Literally, get behind me, you adversary. At that point, Peter had become an obstacle to Jesus in his mission. Peter unwittingly used the same tactic the devil used to divert Jesus' mission in Matthew 4, 8 through 10, where he says, I'll give you all the kingdoms of the world, and you won't have to go through what you actually came to earth to do if you will just bow down and do things my way. One of Jesus' closest followers became a source of temptation to Jesus. It's an interesting way of looking at what is happening here. Jesus set his mind focused with the intent to go to Jerusalem, follow through with all this, and then Peter's response is really an obstacle. Maybe he has good intentions, maybe he's caring, but he's missed the point, and Jesus' response seems harsh. How could Peter have gotten it so wrong? Jesus explained, you do not have in mind the concerns of God, but merely human concerns. Passage in Isaiah 55:9 declares, as the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts. Peter was at risk of missing everything about Jesus. God had set the terms for the mission of the Messiah, and Peter challenged them. For Peter, suffering and death was the worst case scenario. For Jesus, it was the best option because it was the way for him to obey God and accomplish his mission. So maybe let's kind of shift direction. There's our passage. How do we start making some personal applications? I gave you the context about how severe and how horrible the death was. Jesus has just told them, if you want to be my disciple, you have to deny yourself, take up your cross, and follow me. That would have been a very hard thing for them to hear. Okay, they have finally started to believe Jesus is who he says he is. And in testing them and asking them, kind of putting them on the spot, who do you say that I am? Here's what people think. They think I'm a reincarnated being. Who do you think I am? And they really do believe that he is. Peter's confession shows that they do have belief. And then, what is the cost of this belief? If you are my disciple, you will follow me to the death, to this horrible death. Here's some more of the text. It says, the sight of a man being taken to the place of public crucifixion was not unfamiliar in the Roman world of that day. Such a man was commonly made to carry the crossbeam, the patibulum, or his cross as he went to his death. That is the picture which Jesus' words would conjure up in the mind of his hearers. If they were not prepared for that outcome to their discipleship, let them change their minds while there was time. So what was Jesus saying? Does this apply to us today? Or if we want to be Jesus' disciples, what does it mean for us to take our cross and follow him? Maybe we could stop for just a second and see, did this actually happen? What are some of the, according to history, I guess probably don't have much to go off in the New Testament. We've talked, I guess, recently, I think in one of Leonard's sermons, talked about Peter couldn't understand, why he had to face a death. Well, what about John? What about this other disciple? And Jesus says, well, if I will for him to live until I come back, what is that to you? And according to history, many were martyred, died for their faith, died for their belief. I don't know how many were led to a cross. I think tradition says that Peter was crucified. Do we anticipate anything that severe? I guess this would be where we kind of switch gears and apply this to ourselves today. How far would we go to deny ourselves? For many of us, God's gifts take the place of God in our lives. Rather than desire God, we desire His gifts and even worship the gifts instead of Him. It would seem that there is within each of us an enemy which we tolerate at our peril. Jesus called it life and self, or as we would say, the self-life. Its chief characteristic is its possessiveness. The words gain and profit suggest this. To allow this enemy to live is in the end to lose everything. To repudiate it and give it up all for Christ's sake is to lose nothing at last, but to preserve everything unto life eternal. This is getting kind of wordy. Could we maybe rephrase the text, just as Peter is an obstacle? Could we look at things that we have to deny and realize there's short-term gain, profit, versus maybe what they would cost? If we were to follow this desire, what does it leave us with? It may leave us with some temporary earthly pleasures, but is it long-lasting? Denying oneself is not a matter of giving up something, whether for Lent or for the whole of life. It is a decisive saying no to oneself, to one's hopes and plans and ambitions, to one's likes and dislikes, to one's nearest and dearest for the sake of Christ. Does that change the context of what I've said so far? To deny ourselves. Are we thinking of it in terms of maybe something that at this moment currently we're struggling with that we could give up? And they mentioned Lent. My understanding that with some who fast is maybe that is a choice to give up eating or drinking, maybe in an opportunity to replace that time with something else, maybe prayer or thoughtful meditation, and to deny yourself something that you would normally do and replace it with something positive. That's kind of a very simple explanation of that. What is something that we might deny? Okay. We have a hard time hearing here, but I'm going to try to share what she was saying, that maybe you have friends that want to get together with you and want to make plans, and it might be on a Saturday night or something, and maybe your state of consciousness and your awareness and your awakeness, that can all be kind of predetermined the night before. If you're staying up really late and you're so sleepy, are you alert and in your best physical condition? So I may be going a little far with this, but to deny yourself, maybe to be really ready for Sunday. How many of us actually stop and think about and prepare the day before, or maybe get up early and we kind of make the joke about fighting and screaming on the way to church and get the kids to sit down and be quiet and quit fussing and whatever, and then we all get out of the car and politely hold hands and we start smiling and how are you and all. But there's a little bit of preparation and thought that could go into that, and maybe denying yourself. They are little things, little choices that we make that can add up to the big things before the time gets away. I think where this is headed, and the point is, it's a lifelong series of choices. Okay, it may be this now, and then maybe a year from now we struggle with something different. I think there's kind of seasons to life where that you grow and mature and you deal with different things. Take up your cross. The imagery would have been familiar for them, but what is the cross for us? I would say that maybe the uncomfort in letting some of these things go is kind of temporary, and then maybe you come back with a different perspective and think, well, that really wasn't something that I had to do without. You know, at the time it seems like we're really giving up something, but then in retrospect we look back and maybe some of this maybe comes with age and wisdom, and maybe you look at things that you chased after when you were younger, you know, things that seem so exciting as you get older, and maybe you start having family or you start having experiences that you look back and think, well, that was kind of silly or foolish. You know, I think our opinions change. I could probably think back to things that I prayed for and I wanted so bad when I was younger. They're kind of foolish or earthly things. You know, as you get older, hopefully you're trying to focus more on like eternal, long-lasting things. You know, are we able to develop a consciousness or a mindset of just evaluating as things come up in our life and we have to make decisions? I know that this has been a long time ago, but I bet almost everybody in here remembers, you know, the WWJD bracelets, What Would Jesus Do? And I think that I've been in maybe a class or read some material that talks about all the ways that you filter through and make a decision. And some of the things are like, would this please God? Would I see Jesus doing it? Is it going to help or further maybe my mission as a Christian? And I'm kind of making some of these up, but it's kind of like a way for you to make a decision. Is this something that I really need or something that I want? I can't give you the answers for how to decide. Is it too much? Is this suitable to you? Got a lot more wisdom out there, you know, facing me than what I can give you. Why don't I stop for just a second? And those of you that have maybe found yourself really struggling with things that you wanted or desired, how did you deal with maybe saying no, or maybe hitting the pause button and say, well, I'm going to say no for now, and maybe later I'm going to stop and think about it? What have you found to be a successful way to deny yourself to maybe replace it with giving an opportunity to be a stronger Christian? I'm just going to walk this back.
I think especially in this country, in this time, we really aren't concerned that much with the cross part of it, with, you know, somebody actually arresting us for our religion and, you know, putting us in prison or beating us and hanging us on a cross, that sort of thing. But the issue to me is, and I think probably for a lot of us, the harder thing is denial of self. And, you know, it takes a constant effort, always, you know, consciously focusing on God and His will in your life, whether it agrees with your will or not, you know, and being very discerning about what God's will is. And I think it tends to make us operate a little slower. We don't make decisions as quickly as normal because we're taking into account and we're praying about it and we're saying, okay, God, what really is your will for me in this? And for me personally, that denial of self is huge. I mean, it's tough. It's, you know, we're human. We all have our desires and our wants, and denying yourself is to me the tougher part of the equation.
Appreciate Dan's comments. I think he gives some really good advice to maybe just slow down. We move in such a fast-paced society, but to really stop and really think through a lot of the decisions that we make. I'll give an instance of somebody that I grew up with that some of you might know, but built a big, beautiful, little, almost a mansion, I mean, compared to what some of us maybe grew up in or live in. Beautiful home, but just in the last few years has taken on some foster children after his own children are pretty much grown and raised, took on about 4 kids, and they've kind of become their focus in life, and they have decided to sell their house and move into what we might call a parsonage or preacher's house, and it's much smaller, and they're going through and gutting and redoing it, but they're just totally rethinking, and they're in a point in their life, and I found that interesting, and I just wonder in my mind, you know, have they just had kind of maybe a calling or something they felt in their heart to just kind of switch directions and switch gears? You know, we all have have to make these decisions for ourselves, what's right for us. But it made me think, you know, he's looks to me like he's really changed his priorities and like focusing on these things that are going to last long term. Any other thoughts? I appreciate when you share. I think some of us could probably feel guilty when we look at how much we have amassed and accumulated for ourselves. And of course, we want to be prepared and want to have enough for retirement. And we want to live comfortably and all this, but probably most of us could deny a little bit or could afford to give some more and benefit and help others more. And it's really tough. I mean, how far could you go? All of us could certainly do more. We could never do enough, but could we do more to deny ourselves? I'm sure we could. Some other individuals want to chime in here? Stan, you're smiling at me. What do you think?
This world that we live in and the society we live in ask us to be competitive with to another. They're keeping up with the Joneses. They're keeping up with the neighbors. And we fall into that trap. We don't want to look to God. We want to look to man and say, I want to follow man and I want to be successful and I want to be bragged on or whatever else glory that comes from that, rather than looking at, and that's exactly what's summed up here, especially in the last part of that, and Jesus just said, what good is it if you gain the whole world and lose your soul? Because life is short, and it's not a competition out there. We need to keep sight of that.
I thought that was very interesting. You know, if you were to compete, we would never win. I mean, there's obviously, you know, the likes of Elon Musk or Bezos or somebody that's, you know, into the hundreds of billions. You could, I mean, at what point do you win? You compete with the Joneses. Keeping up with the Joneses, you make what the Joneses or have what they have, and then there's going to be the Smiths, or there's going to be somebody else. So how much is enough? That is our society for sure, to push, you know, to drive our economy, to push you to want, to push you to have more and more and more. Any other thoughts? There are other passages that maybe we could spend time looking at. Of course, one that some of you could probably quote, part of it would be Romans 12, talks about, I beseech you, therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, that you present your bodies a living sacrifice, wholly acceptable to God, which is your reasonable service. I mean, reasonable in the sense that he died, gave everything to save you. It's only reasonable that you turn around and sacrifice, or you slow down and put some thought into what you're doing. Yeah. Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, that you may prove what is good and acceptable and perfect will of God. For I say, through the grace given to me, to everyone who is among you, not to think of himself more highly than he ought to think, but to think soberly, as God has dealt to each one a measure of faith. I must have lost a bunch of you. Got a lot of either that, or a lot of you stayed up real late last night. You just have to start preparing this next week. Deny yourself Saturday night. That's most of my material, and I think I'm going to quit a little bit early. Any more comments? Appreciate you being here and sharing with me and making a really hard topic a little easier for me. I'm not the expert on self-denial, but I think that's a lifelong struggle that just, hopefully we mature and we value things differently. As we get older, we have a different concept of life and where we're headed, and just what Dan said, just about to study, to know God's Word. How are you going to know what to deny and what to give up until you really spend some time studying and put a lot of thought into the things that are really important? She mentioned the reading, and I kept it in my Bible. I've had it years and years. It's very interesting, very sobering, but it's called The Crucifixion of Jesus by Douglas Leatherman, and he's MD. So, and I don't even know. Oh, here it comes, a free Bible correspondence. No, this is you can just see me and I'll let you take a picture of that, or you could find it. Maybe they could make copies of it. I don't know if it's maybe copyrighted, you may have to buy it, but it's very interesting going through the entire process of Jesus' crucifixion. Outside of watching like the Passion or something, I mean, you just have to try to research to see what actually happens, and that is fascinating. Other comments? Okay, appreciate you being in class. Have a good rest of your morning.